Tov Hey. ובגפן שלשה שריגים, in the dream that Yosef was interpreting for the butler of Parai, where he dreamed that he had over there, he saw a vine and he saw three tendrils, three what we would call branches, but it's not a branch, but it's a vine. I took the grapes, and I squeezed the grapes out into the cup of Pari. Maybe the Sefer Amorim Tov Samach Beis, the Alter Rebbe brings in the Sefer Amorim of the year Tov Samach Beis, Ubetosef Sagois Cholu Beira Toida, and the Oida Toida, the Samach Tzedek, the same mimer is brought down with additional Hagois of the Tzemach Tzedek, as there are many Amorim over there. The style of Oida Toida is in that way as well. Maimer Zoyar, they bring down what the Zoyar says, Hai man de chon chame in vin chivrin bechelma, someone that sees white grapes. I guess that's what we call in the store green grapes, but I think it's called white grapes in the industry. In their dream, simen yofeloi. This is a good sign, it's a good omen. Uchme, if he sees dark grapes, lo, that's not a good sign. And this is connected with what the Saramashkim saw, with what Pari's butler saw. Since the Saramashkim saw white grapes in his dream, therefore Yosef knew that was a good dream, as opposed to with the baker that he interpreted it in a negative way. So Mamshech and the Alter Rebbe continues, after bringing this Maimer Azoyah, we first need a preface. What's the content, what's the inner meaning of the cup of Pari? The idea behind this is, it's known, the word Pari indicates opening up, loosening, and revealing. Like it says by Soito, Para Roisha Itcha, the idea of loose hairs are called Periya, or and other things, when you loosen and open things up and uncover them, you use the term Periya. So what is that referring to? What levels that refer to? It says, Vahainu Midas HaMalchus, the Midah of Spheres HaMalchus, the Megalia, that it becomes revealed, the Bei is Periyu, or from the word Priya, that in it becomes opened up and released, called Nahoirin Chulu, all the lights. Why is Malchus considered the place where all the lights are revealed? What does Malchus have to do with revealing of lights? So he says that since we know that Malchus is associated with the idea of speech, the Hu Hadibur, that's the level of speech, that becomes revealed in speech what is concealed in it, meaning what can be concealed that the speech reveals. Seichel oy midah, you can have the level of intellect, you can have the level of emotions, and the emotions and the intellect that the person is experiencing, he reveals through his speech. So Malchus is called the idea of Pare because it's revelation. All is revealed of the intellect or the emotion through and in the breath of speech. But we need to understand for what reason was specifically Malchus likened to speech, seemingly as far as revealing. You have also that type of thing of revelation in thought as well, as he's soon going to explain how. Also, thought is only comprised of letters. And what's the idea of letters? The whole idea of letters is about revelation. The ois umaloshin asa boiker. The word ois we're associating Chassidus is what it says, and morning has come. So ois is from the word asa, arrival, coming, revelation. That shows on the level of revelation. So therefore, since thought is the, if you will, first open manifestation of letters, and letters is the idea of Gilui. So Machshava should be the idea of Malchus, which is Gilui. Why is Malchus associated with speech? This means though if you compare it to another person, so then thought is concealment. One person does not know what's in the heart of another. So therefore my thought is something that's concealed. So how can I refer to thought as revelation? But even though when referring to another person, thought is concealment, in a general way, thought is also an idea of revelation. Because in thought there's already the idea of letters. And that's why it's the revelation is an internal type of revelation. It's a revelation where the person's ideas and emotions are revealed inwardly. To give a silly analogy, I like to say the difference between speech and thought is like the difference between a phone and an intercom. A phone is meant to communicate with someone outside, someone not in your building, for example. An intercom is literally made up of two words, internal communication. It's meant to communicate within a certain area, within a certain limited amount of space. The machshava communicates to the person themselves, their midas, their intellect. You cannot think an idea without the letters and language of thought. You cannot consciously be aware of an emotion unless you put it into your mind, which already has, to a certain degree, language and letters. Whereas speech is about taking those letters, taking that emotion or that idea, and communicating it outward. So the initial part of revelation begins already with thought. So if it already begins with thought, so therefore that's the revelation that Malchus should be referred to, not the revelation of speech. Then the Rebbe says, "V'hi gam ken bechinas levush hanifrad." Thought is also a garment. That garment that is by its very nature is something that is separated from the person. In other words, like this. True, there are, you might be familiar with this, we might have spoken about this, that in the three garments of thought, speech, and deed, machshava is called the garment that's joined with a person, and it's action that's outside and separated, and even speech, it's nivdal and so on. But pashtus, what he's meaning over here by saying levush hanifrad is the very nature of a levush is that it's nifrad, like a person's garment, person, and that's the whole difference between koiches and levushim spiritually as well. Koiches cannot be easily changed. If I have an emotion, I have to work a lot to change that emotion. So it takes a lot of avodah to develop an ava and yira for Hashem, for example. And similarly, even if I have a certain type of way, how my mind is working, how my ideas are, it takes a lot to change that. Thought, speech, and deed, these are external, and it's like a garment that kalavush tachlifim, this always brings down, that just like garments can be easily changed. You take off this jacket, you put on a different jacket. You take off these shoes, you put on different shoes. It's the same thing, even thought, which is in comparison to the rest of the garments of speech and action, it's called levush hamiyuchad, but still, the very fact that it's a garment means that it's separate from the person. But of the three garments, even though thought is separated, al shua yoser pnimiki yadu top of page vav, of the three garments, it's the most inner level. So that's the question that the Rebbe is posing. Why do we associate Malchus with the level of speech? Because Malchus is about Gilui. Thought is also about Gilui and revelation. So the Rebbe answers, who the idea behind this is, Liboris nifrodim, because from Malchus comes down the vitality and life force to become created, separated entities, things that are separated from Hashem, nivroim, that are not one with Hashem. Just like speech is outward, outside of the person, whereas thought is all within the person, it's still part of him. To create something that is separated from Hashem, that's only through the level of speech. Just like by human speech, the breath that is being exhaled through speaking becomes something separated from the person. It left the person's body and it goes outward, and that's why another person can hear and understand what the person is speaking. The letters of thought are still inside the person. They do not leave and go outward to be a separate entity. Therefore we see that thought can feel even a pain that's in his toenail. Not only that is the relationship of the thought with the foot. In other words, not just that the foot communicates to the thought, but the thought impacts the foot. So too, when it arises in his thought to move his leg, immediately the foot will move on its own. You don't have to do any other activity. The thought immediately directs the leg to move. So we see this type of interrelationship within the person's body, how much it's internalized with the person, his thought, that it feels the foot and it directs the foot. And not like speech, that the limbs of a person will not become affected by the speech whatsoever. How come? Because the thought is the root and the source from where eventually the life force and vitality of the leg comes from. Though it's a long trip to get there, though it came down the chain descent of many levels, till the life force and vitality of his toenail comes from the thought. This vitality that's in the toenail and the vitality that the thought contains are part of one entity. It's not something completely separated, though we used the term before levush hanifrad. Now, taking that concept of thought in the spiritual realms, that since thought, just like that person down here, so thought lamaila is part of, let's say, the essence. Therefore, it's impossible to have been drawn down and to come into being. An entity that has an end and it's separated from the letters of Hashem's thought. Because everything that descends in this chain descent from the thought is still part of the very essence of Hashem himself. What would come out of Hashem's thought is still all in the world of Atzilus, which Atzilus is the world of unity, the world of oneness, just like the thought and the foot are one entity, like we said before, and that's why it's both impacted by the thought and the thought impacts it. Avol ikar midas malchus, but the primary level of malchus is not about Atzilus. If the primary level of malchus would be about Atzilus, so then machshava, it would be applicable to compare it to thought. But that's not the primary function. The primary function of malchus is the way it becomes the power of the doer in the thing that's done. Meaning, Hashem's power, the way it manifests itself to create nivroim nifradim. So therefore, ein ella b'chinas hadibur, this is only in the level of speech. Ki beruach piv yisbarach nishave kol nivra lias b'chinas yesh v'nifrat chulum, because through the breath of his mouth came into being every creation, that creation should become a separate entity, a separate yesh. This is why speech is called by the name Pari. Priya v'gilui kol nahoirin atzvuin, the opening up and revealing of all concealed lights. Sheheim bechinas atzmius ha'atzilus, that they are the level of the essence of Atzilus. The lights that were concealed are part of the essence of Atzilus. Now Paroi, now Malchus, they become outside. By speech, they become separated. That's the way Malchus already transitions and comes into the worlds of Bri Yitzir Asiyah. This Malchus, Chassidus a lot of times brings down the way it's still concealed. But here we're talking about the primary function of Malchus is coming down to Bri Yitzir Asiyah. Shalzeh concerning this, it says, the expression that says concerning Gan Eden, that when Hashem made the rivers coming out of Gan Eden, he says, Shalzeh Namar Misham Yiparid, from there it separates, meaning Malchus then separates and deals with worlds of separation and deals with creations that are separated in the worlds of Bri Yitzir Asiyah. So that's point number one. That's Pari. From understanding that Pari is a level of Malchus, the level of the speech of Hashem, which creates separate worlds, from here we're going to go to explain the idea of the cup of Pari. The Achash Nizbar in Pari. After it was explained the idea of Pari, that's the level of Malchus, like we mentioned earlier. Now will be understood the idea that I squeeze the grapes into the cup of Pari. It's similar to the wine of a cup of bracha. So the Rebbe says in the parentheses, so that there should be able to be any type of hamshacha from above. You want the juice of the grapes, the wine, to come down. You want to have the wine. You need to have tzarech lias kli kibul. There has to be a vessel of receiving. Shezeu Indian hakois. That's the idea of a cup, is to receive that level. And then when it's ready to receive, then you could pour into it the wine. That's the idea of drawing down intellect into Malchus. That's the level of the spheres coming down from above to below once you have the cup that's being makabel. So to the cup of Pari, who kelim the Malchus, shemakabelim hayayin, that's the vessels of Malchus that receive in it the wine. What's the level of the wine? The level of wine is the idea of intellect. Like we're soon going to explain the connection with wine. The idea of pouring the wine into the cup, or squeezing the wine into the cup, as we'll soon explain, is drawing down chokhmah into the level of speech. Like we said before, that speech houses and communicates an idea or an emotion. So you have the moichin going into nukvah. What does it mean that I will squeeze them? Squeezing indicates that you're not just transferring from one location to another location, but it indicates that you're extracting it from a state where it was previously concealed. That means initially the wine was concealed within the grapes. The becomes revealed through the squeezing of the grapes. The idea of drawing down intellect to the feminine, to Malchus, which is the idea of drawing down the level of Chachma into speech. It's drawn down and becoming revealed from the concealment of Chachma that's in his brain. Second paragraph, but the idea of drawing down the intellect to the level of Nekeva, of the feminine. It's the idea of the squeezing of the grapes into the cup of Paroi. It's not only coming from the level of the might, the powers of Bina alone. It says concerning dinim, judgments, gvuras, are awakened at its end. In other words, Bina has to do with the line of Gvura, Chachma has to do with the line of Chesed, and eventually from Bina comes down Gvura and comes down Hoid, from Chachma comes down Chesed and Netzach. So that is insufficient to just have the level of the Gevura that comes out from Bina. We're not just squeezing the wine out from the level of intellect, even though he used the term Moich in general, just from Bina alone. But Shazel in Veuchme, dark shows on concealment. That dark shows, so the dark grapes is the idea of the judgments that come out at the end, which come from Bina. So Bina indicates the level of the dark grapes. Elam in vechivrim rather comes from the wine that was in the dream of the butler, was from the white grapes he saw in his dream. That's when the levels of Chesed, of Abba, which is Chachma, sweeten the severities and the stringencies of the level of Ima, of Bina. And that's what it means, I will squeeze. So squeezing is not just about extracting. Different ways he could extract. You can cut something open, whatever. This extraction takes place through squeezing specifically. The idea of squeezing indicates a particular idea. Through the levels of chesed of chachma, squeezing indicates bittul, nullification. So you're squeezing through these white grapes, the chesadim of Abba, which is the concealed level of chachma. Bittul has to do with the concealed level of chachma higher than bina. That's why chachma is made up of the two parts. Koyach ma showing on bittul. So we have the bittul. The bittul is shehu soichet san novim amtikon. The bittul is squeezing these grapes to make them sweet, to turn them into wine. Ad to such a degree, shegam yizgalu yiu b'chinas yayin hameshumar. Even after they become revealed, they are called the protected or the guarded wine. It says that la'asid lavoi, the Rebbe uses it a lot of times in the brachas at the end of a lot of mamorim. La'asid lavoi, by the Sudas, Levyasan, the Shoirabar, and yayin hameshumar. Literally, it means the wine that was concealed and protected since Sheshes Mebereshis. Like it's brought down the Zoyar, Dahu Yain. This, what we're referring to, is the wine, the Isneter Be'invayu, Ameshumar Ba'anovav. It's considered guarded and protected in its grapes, Mi Sheshes Mebereshis, from the 6 days of creation. And still in all, it's called Yayin, it's called wine because it's protected, because this bittul affects that even the wine, when it comes out, has the same power and the same idea that it's Yayin HaMeshumar, the guarded and protected wine.